There are some psychological experiments so disturbing, so ethically wrong, that they were permanently banned. These weren't just ordinary studies. They crossed the line between science and cruelty, leaving long-lasting trauma in the lives of real people. One of the most infamous is the Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in 1971 by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. He placed college students into a simulated prisons, some as guards, others as prisoners, to observe human behavior under authority and confinement. What began as a role-playing scenario quickly devolved into psychological abuse. The guards became cruel and sadistic, while the prisoners suffered emotional breakdowns. It was meant to last 2 weeks, but had to be shut down in just 6 days. The shocking part wasn't just how fast it escalated, but how deeply everyone Zimbardo included and got lost in the roles. The experiment exposed the terrifying speed at which power can corrupt, and how fragile our sense of morality really is. Another disturbing study was called the Monster Study. Yes, that was the real name. In 1939, researchers set out to prove that stuttering was a learned behavior. They used orphan children as subjects and told some of them they had speech problems, even when they didn't. The outcome was devastating. Many of these children developed lifelong speech issues and deep emotional scars. The experiment was buried for decades, kept secret because of the shame and damage it caused. Then there was the Little Albert experiment in 1920, led by psychologist John B. Watson. In this study, a baby was conditioned to fear a white rat by pairing it with loud, frightening noises. Over time, the baby grew terrified not only of the rat, but of anything white and fluffy. The child, Albert, was never deconditioned or treated after the experiment. The trauma possibly followed him into adulthood, although his identity was never fully confirmed. It's hard to imagine a worse violation of ethical boundaries than deliberately inducing fear in a baby. Even darker is the story of MKUltra, a CIA mind control program that spanned from the Chong 1950s to the 1970s. The CIA secretly dosed people with LSD and other chemicals without their knowledge, hoping to develop new interrogation techniques. Victims of MKUltra included soldiers, students, prisoners, and hospital patients, many of whom never consented or even knew they were part of a study. Some suffered permanent psychological damage. One man, Frank Olson, died under mysterious circumstances after being unknowingly dosed with LSD. The Milgram experiment, conducted at Yale in the 1960s, asked whether ordinary people would obey orders to harm others. Participants believed they were administering electric shocks to someone in another room for giving wrong answers. Despite screams of pain completely faked, but unknown to the participant, most people kept going when told to do so by an authority figure in a lab coat. The experiment revealed a chilling truth, that under the right conditions, anyone might follow orders, no matter how inhumane. In 1924, the Landis facial expression experiment took an even more bizarre turn. Subjects were asked to mimic emotions, then were unexpectedly ordered to decapitate a live rat. Most people hesitated, but disturbingly, some complied. The study provided no significant scientific insight. It is remembered only for the ethical horror of pushing people into harming animals without reason, just to see what they do. One of the most tragic stories is that of David Reimer. After a botched circumcision, psychologist John Money advised that the baby be raised as a girl, arguing that gender was purely a product of upbringing. Money used David's life as a case study, publishing his success. But David never identified as female, suffered immense psychological trauma, and later took his own life. His story remains a haunting reminder of the consequences of treating human lives as experiments. Then there was the Aversion Project in apartheid-era South Africa. Gay soldiers were subjected to forced sex changes, chemical castration, and electric shock therapy under the guise of curing homosexuality. This wasn't science, it was state-sanctioned torture. Many victims were left with lifelong physical and emotional scars, and to this day, few have seen justice. The Robbers Cave experiment also pushed ethical boundaries. Children at a summer camp were unknowingly used in a study on group conflict. They were split into rival teams, and the researchers actively fueled aggression and hostility between them. The boys became violent, hateful, and deeply divided, just as the psychologists had planned. The experiment was stopped only after the researchers attempted to restore peace by inventing shared problems for the groups to solve. Harry Harlow's Pit of Despair was perhaps one of the most emotionally brutal animal experiments ever conducted. He placed baby monkeys in complete isolation, depriving them of any social interaction to study the effects of loneliness. The monkeys became severely depressed, some refusing to eat or move. Harlow claimed he was studying attachment and love, but what he really demonstrated was how utterly destructive isolation can be. Each of these experiments revealed something profound about human psychology, but they also left behind a legacy of pain and regret. These were not just academic studies, they were real experiences that damaged real lives. Today, psychological research must pass strict ethical reviews before it can proceed. Informed consent, the right to withdraw, and protections against harm are now standard. But the scars from these banned experiments remain. They remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is not an excuse to treat people or animals as disposable. Just because we can ask a question doesn't mean we should try to answer it at any cost. Science without ethics becomes cruelty. Perhaps the most chilling part of these studies is not what the scientists did, but how easily others followed along. Teachers shocked students. Soldiers were used as guinea pigs. Children were lied to, manipulated, and harmed, all in the name of progress. These weren't monsters in lab coats. They were everyday people, following orders, chasing results, ignoring pain. That's the darkest truth these experiments uncovered. Our minds are vulnerable not just to manipulation, but to obedience, power, and the illusion of authority. And that's exactly why we must never forget what happened. So stay curious, but stay aware, because the past has already shown us what happens when curiosity crosses the line.